welcome. And we'll start, of course, with our bracha and thank you for joining us. And of course, I hope you find these interesting and helpful. I will tell you that the material that I'm reading is challenging. Some of it's challenging because it's not exactly easy to understand, and some of it is challenging because it challenges our values in some ways and trying to understand what the Torah is, because my assumption is the Torah really is an amazing guidebook as to what it is to become a human being. So that's why we have the oral law, as I've said so many times. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And we will start, thank you, with the share. And hopefully you can see it now. Well, so we were talking about someone who has a nocturnal emission. And it's saying the circumstances if you're at war, right, going to war with your neighbors or at war period. And it talks about if a person has a nocturnal emission, and Rashi explains based on the Talmud that it's not limited to that. It is just simply saying what is most commonly a situation that renders one into a state of impurity. And of course, that whole subject of ritual or spiritual impurity is a very arcane subject. We're in the midst of that right now. And so the question is, well, what do you do about it, right? So first of all, he's told that he has to go outside, he has to go outside of the encampment. And then it says, lo yavo el tocha machaneh. It adds a negative commandment. He shouldn't come into the midst of the camp. That's where we left it. V'haya lifnot erev, and right before evening, as evening, or actually we're talking about nightfall here. Yirchatz b'mayim, he should bathe himself in water. Ukevo hashemesh, and when the sun sets, yavo el tocha machaneh, he can come back into the encampment. So let's take a look. Here we are, Yud Bet, V'haya lifnot erev. So as evening approaches, as he gets to evening, and Rashi explains lifnot erev, in the face of evening perhaps, or the direction of evening. Samuch la'arev shimsho, meaning close to the nightfall of his sunset. And it's called his sunset because the setting of the sun directly affects his status of purity, and it allows him then to become pure. It's part of the process, you'll see. Yitbol, right? He has to immerse himself. When it says Yirchatz b'mayim, he should wash himself in water. It's understood to mean, the tradition takes it as meaning to immerse himself in a mikveh, in a body of pool of water that is specially designed for this purpose. And mikveh means a gathering, a mikveh of water. She'enot tahor, so Rashi was making the point that he does it close to when the sun sets, close to actually nightfall. That way there is no trace of light, any light left. She'enot tahor, because he is not considered cleansed, he is not considered pure, velo he'erev shemesh, right, without nightfall. And we have this concept called a tibul yom, meaning that while he has gone in the process to the mikveh and immersed himself in this mikveh, nevertheless, he still has to wait for the day to come to an end, for nightfall to appear. And so he's in the process of purification, because we know that depending on the level of impurity, it may take various degrees and various processes to take place in order to become purified. So we know already about the ashes of the red heifer, that is to cleanse you from tum'at mate, from the impurity that you can contract through a corpse, but there are other kinds of processes too. So, in a case of the emission of semen, that involves both immersion and uh, nightfall. So, going on. V'yad tihiyeh lecha. So yad, of course, means a hand, and I'm saying look at onkelos because onkelos translates it v'atar metakan, meaning a designated place. So he's understanding yad here as designated place, a place on hand, you might say, if we wanted to try and keep the word hand in it. You shall designate. Michutz lamachaneh, outside of the encampment. V'yatzata shama chutz, and you shall go out to that place. And we'll take a look at the Rashi on this. Yad tielecha, right? Ketargumo. So he says here, just as he understands it, the pshat, the plain meaning of this is just as the Targum translates it. As in other words, we have to translate the word yad as this designated place. Kamo, and he gives an example from elsewhere where the word yad is used. Ish al yado, a man next to his fellow. So, in other words, next to means in a place, right? Placed next to his friend. Michutz lamachaneh, when it says outside the encampment, it means chutz la'anan. In other words, it has to be outside the cloud which was covering the camp. You could not do it within that area that was covered by the cloud. Onwards, v'yated tielecha, and you should have for yourself a peg al azenecha, included with your weapons. Remember, we were talking about going out to battle. V'haya b'shivtecha chutz, right? And it should go that when you go outside, when you sit outside, v'chafarta ba, you should dig a hole with it. Understood? You should dig with it. You should excavate with it. V'shavta, and return. It's from the root shuv, v'chisita etzeatecha, so as to cover up your excrement. Very interesting. This is typical of Ki Tetze, that it has these very personal kinds of laws that go into these elements of life. And just to show you that the Torah is a Torah of life, it deals with the way life is, and life isn't always the prettiest. We have these elements within life that are necessities, and the Torah doesn't shun or shy away from discussing these things, but also the notion of being considerate, right? And taking care of this element of one's personal needs so as to be considerate of your environment and the people around you and things like that. So let's take a look if there's anything else. Okay, here we go. Right. Oh, yes, Golda.
Yeah. So why wasn't this little section separated from the section above?
Please forgive me. I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, okay. Okay. Can you now?
Yes, it's
Okay.
better.
I was a little further away from the mic.
Yeah,
Uh,
okay.
why is this section not separated from the section above, like most other? Oh, this is not exactly what the other was, or do they consider it too much the same?
I think the fact is that they're talking about uh, purity. In some cases, we were talking about spiritual purity right above, but we're also talking about, bodily excretions. The previous section, if you're talking, are you talking about the thing that
Correct.
started with, you know, I think it's all talking about biological processes, things that involve
Okay.
biology, right? Uh,
Okay, but
so
I
when
would
we
still
look,
put a little separation because I
well,
would assume that that includes women.
Yes, it
And
absolutely
the thing
does.
before it
Right,
wouldn't
right, right.
necessarily. Yeah, so that's all.
True,
Okay.
true, true. Um, and even though it may be addressed to men, nevertheless, because it's talking about battle, and understandably at that time men were the ones. There is, of course, this separation from the whole issue of, the peoples that can intermarry, right? So
Yeah,
this is this new section here, which is talking about something that happens to you bodily, the
right.
emission of semen, and then it's talking about the emission of feces. Okay,
Correct.
so
Okay.
that's why
Okay.
I think there's a
Just just
connection there.
just a
Yes.
thought. Okay. Thank
No, no,
you.
no, it's good. It's good. It's good. Okay. Here we go. Al azenecha, right? On your along with your weapons, you should keep this little peg to dig with. Levad mishar clay tashmishecha. So it's interesting that Rashi translates it not as weapons, but any of the tools that you use, like your pocket knife or what other. In other words, the kinds of things that you take along with you, right? But here it says azeinecha kamo kli zainecha. So he says azeinecha is as if it's saying the instruments of zainecha would be weapons, right? So he says it's like your weapons, but it doesn't have to be, literally weapons. Let me see if there's anything else. Okay, good. We're going to go on with this, you see. And there's this lovely little, it's not a digression, but a substantiation of what we're talking about, right? Ki Hashem Elokecha, because the Lord your God, mithalech bekerev machanecha, goes around in the midst of your camp. So there's this beautiful passage here talking about, that God is actually present in the camp. I'm going to pause. Let's see what I can do here. No, it's okay. I'm just gonna have to keep going. All right. Sorry. Okay. Lahatzilcha, to rescue you, ulatet oivecha lefanecha, and to place your enemies before you, v'haya machanecha kadosh, so that your camp should be sanctified. And of course, this word sanctified is not an easy word to exactly understand, but again, it means uh, designated in a specific way. It shouldn't be like any other camp. That's, I think, my sense of kadosh. That these little things that are mentioned here about being in a state of purity, taking care of your bodily needs and bodily functions, etc., is all part of acting in a holy way, right? V'lo yera ebach, so that there should not be seen amongst you ervat davar, something obscene, v'shav me'acharecha, so that God retreats from before you, from after you. So in other words, this is interesting, right? It's talking about personal behavior, and that personal behavior needs to be thoughtful and done in a way that allows the divine to remain with you, to be comfortable with you, as it were. And I think there are a few interesting implications, because of this particular idea. Let's just do the Rashi here. V'lo yera'eh b'cha, right? So it should not be seen amongst you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, that God should not see amongst you ervat davar, something obscene. So I'm going to pause here. I'm going to stop the share, and I'm going to pause the recording. We're back in here. All right, good. So you should be able to see the screen now. And let's keep going. So again, these various and sundry laws right? Lo taskir eved el adonav. You shall not, liskor means to close, but here the context means you shall not return a slave to his master. Asher in the case, right? In the case, Yinatzel elecha me'im adonav. If he seeks to save himself to you, in other words, he is looking to you for rescue. He's seeking your rescue, me'im adonav, from his master. Let's take a look. So again, just social laws. Lo taskir eved. So here we go. Let's take a look at here. Lo timsar eved amamin. So it's interesting because Onkelos takes quite a bit of license here to translate the Hebrew, taking into account the full tradition as to how to understand this. So lo timsar, you shall not hand over. It's helpful, right? Eved, a servant, a slave. Amamin. This means a non-Israelite slave, leyad riboneh, to the hand of his master. So with regards, he's saying, Onkelos is saying this is referring to what would be referred to as a Canaanite slave in rabbinic parlance, meaning a non-Jewish slave. Let's see what it says. Okay, the rest is pretty straightforward because the Hebrew was pretty straightforward. De'ish tezev levatach. He's seeking rescue from you, milvat riboneh, from the hand of his master. So, right. So lo taskir eved ketargumo. So Rashi tells you want to follow the targum on this one. Davar acher. So he figures you understand the Targum. Davar acher, another interpretation. Afilu eved knaani shel Yisrael. So he's saying, even in the case of a non-Jewish slave, of an Israelite, who is owned by an Israelite, shebarach michutz la'aretz, who fled from outside the land of Israel, the Eretz Yisrael, to the land of Israel. So had to think about that as to what this includes and what this doesn't include. So does it mean that if it's a Canaanite slave in the land of Israel who flees to you, or is it saying we don't even have to mention that even if he came from outside the land of Israel, you're into the land of Israel, you need to take care of him? Does it include then a slave, let's say a Canaanite slave who was a slave to an Israelite in the land of Israel, who fled to you outside the land of Israel? So it's leaving, for me at any rate, a lot of unanswered questions as to exactly what the circumstances are, if there are specific circumstances. But of course, in general, it is an amazing and beautiful statement about making sure you protect people who might well be liable to abuse, right? In general, if we were to just look at the takeaway there. But there's all this material here to further understand what's going on. So this is an example of what I said at the beginning, that this material isn't easy to understand. Imcha yeshev, the law goes on to say, Imcha yeshev, he shall dwell amongst you, with you, bekir b'cha, in your midst, right? He shall dwell with you in your midst, b'makom asher yivchar, in a place which he chooses, b'achad sha'arecha, in one of your, literally, gates, in other words, one of your cities, b'tov lo, as is good for him, in other words, whatever he prefers. Lo tonenu, you should not. Basically, tonenu means like abuse him, but it also has the meaning of take advantage of him. You shall not take advantage of him. That's how I understand this concept here. So the Torah takes two verses to clarify what they're talking about, and to, without any doubt, reinforce the idea that if this person has been subject to abuse, he needs to be protected. So there's a major, you can think, there's a major issue going on here as to be a powerful social thought. Lo tieh kadesha mibnot Yisrael. So what is a kadesha? Rashi's going to have to explain what we mean by this. There's more than one understanding. We know that the word kadosh generally means dedicated or significant or something like that, right? But here the dedication is not a good designation. Dedication, basically, it is often translated as like a cult prostitute, something like that. We'll take a look at Rashi in a moment and we'll finish the sentence. V'lo yeh kadesh mibnei Israel, nor shall there be a kadesh of the sons of Israel, of Israelite sons. Okay. So we'll see what this means, right? Lo tieh kadesha. Mufkeret meaning open to, umukdeshet, and dedicated, umizumenet, and set aside for, liznut, for immorality, for sexual immorality. So again, this comes back to a theme we've had before, that the idea of setting high moral standards for the Jewish people, that it's an important issue. V'lo yeh kadesh. So this is referring to the male side of this, and taken from Sanhedrin 54, Mizuman, again, prepared for the Mishkav Zachur. This would be, again, this is for pederasty, right? Mishkav Zachur, lying of male. The Onkelos Tirgame, and Onkelos translates it into the Aramaic as Lo tieh itata mibnat Yisrael. This is his Aramaic here. A woman of the daughters of Israel, Lo tehe legavar avda, should not be married to a slave. She'af zu mufkeret bebiliat leve'ilat znut hi. So because in this case, if this woman winds up with this slave, it is also open, right? And she now becomes open to being to prostitution, essentially. Me'achar, why? Because she'ein kiddushin tofsin lo ba, because there is no legitimate marriage between a slave and a free Israelite woman. Shehare hukshu lechamor. This is stuff that I don't like very much. It's very insulting, and I almost wouldn't even want to translate it, and you'll see why. Because they are associated, they're connected to a donkey. Shne'emar, as it states in Genesis 22, this is where Abraham is taking Isaac onto the altar, and he says to his servants, Shvu lachem po im hachamor. He says, remain here, right? Here, rest yourselves here with the donkey. And in the Torah, it doesn't have vowels. So the fact that the word im and the word which means nation, look the same without vowels, and the interpretation is hadomeh lachamor, a people that resembles a donkey. And again, these sort of personal slights, are very hard to swallow. Again, trying to make the best of it, one can contextualize it. That is to say, we hear today even, Jews being told that they're animals of various insulting kinds. We have heard that from certain people. I'm not saying it to justify it, that kind of behavior. And exactly what they meant by this is to say that behaving the way that that the Jewish people are commanded to behave, that in fact, if they in fact behaved in the way that the Torah wants them to behave, it is a whole different order of humanity. So I'm going to keep going unless you have questions about this. But I do struggle with these little pieces here. Velo Yisav Gavra Mibnei Israel, and again, a man of the sons of Israel should not marry, right? Itata Amta, a woman who's a slave, a maidservant, but it's a slave. She'af hu ne'esa kadesh al yada, because he himself, in a sense, becomes prostituted through her. Shekol be'ilotav b'liot, because all his moments of intimacy, if I can try and speak cleanly, are considered to be just they're nothing but carnal, and they're considered to be not within the sanctity of a marriage. She'ein kiddushin tofsin lo ba, because again, he does not have he is not legally married to her. There's no such thing as a legal marriage in this particular case either, when we say kiddushin tofsin, that they apply or hold in this particular case. So again, you have to sort of stand back and say, what's the Torah trying to teach us here? The best at this point that I can do is to say, I believe it's trying to tell us to be very deliberate and thoughtful about being promiscuous, and that promiscuity is just it can really have terrible effects on us as human beings. And I'm going to have to stop here, unfortunately, because we run out of time. And I also want to leave a little bit of time for you in case you do have any comments. So, okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to stop. Yeah, go ahead. Do you want to say something before I stop the recording?
I was going to ask you if a woman slave that's Jewish, an Israelite, marries another Jewish slave that's an Israelite, that should be okay. Even though the two slaves are Jewish, I can see that, but of course, I can't see a Jewish woman marrying a non-Jewish slave, a goy. But I can see them both marrying together. I think that was in the one of the what do you call it? Portions that if a Jewish slave wants to stay with the master and he marries another Jewish woman, they can do that. I'm confused.
Okay. So again, right. Understand that if you look at the laws of Jewish slavery or Israelite slavery, you realize that in general, the Torah is saying they are not owned by the master, right? Because in general, they have to go free in a case of a slave who's sold by a court to pay for their theft, etc. They have to go free after 7 years. Or in the sabbatical year. So there really isn't a concept of slavery amongst Israelites. This is one of those cases where I feel that they're trying to slowly develop that where they really want to work towards is where there's no slavery at all. The fact that there's slavery in our world today, I think, is just an abomination. That the whole notion we already see within the Torah a desire to move away from slavery. So again, when an Israelite slave marries a woman who's an Israelite, who's also a servant, that is not going to prevent the marriage from being a legal marriage. And I think that's all we have time for right now. And we have to deal with the issue that you're talking about, which is raised in Mishpatim, in Exodus, at another time. So thanks. Take care, everyone. Be well. Bye-bye.
Ellie.